The paradox of self-reliance and developing it is to start by recognizing the things that are out of your control and recognizing the ways that you're suffering, you've been hammered by life, you're stressed, you're pressed, you're pushed on. We have to start there. So this is not about positive thinking or some kind of so-called spiritual bypass. This is about starting with, wow, what's real?
Welcome, everybody, to the Dr. Espen podcast. I am Espen. Today, I am joined by Rick Hanson, Dr. Rick Hanson, PhD, Senior Fellow at the UC Berkeley's Greater Good Science Center, New York Times bestselling author, clinical psychologist, and one of my favorite parts, meditation teacher. Today's conversation is going to go deep. We're going to talk about all things science. We're going to talk about the power of the heart. We're going to talk about the opportunity for us to live incredible lives. In this instance, Dr. Rick's books have been published in over 31 different languages, including the book Making Great Relationships, which I love to touch on today, Neurodharma, Resilient, Hardwired Happiness, Just One Thing, The Buddha's Brain, and so on and so forth. He's been a co-host in what's called Being Well, the Being Well podcast, something to look up, which has been downloaded over 10 million times. He's an expert in neuroplasticity, something that I'm really passionate about myself, and has taught meditation worldwide since 1974 when he started this. And I love this conversation about understanding the clinical cognitive aspects of how the brain works and the neuroscience. He's obviously got his PhD and doctorate in something very similar, but then the spiritual aspect of it, or at least the mindfulness meditation aspect of it, which I think is so incredible. So stay tuned for this incredible interview. I want to say special welcome, Dr. Rick. How are you today?
I'm really happy to just hear that whole introduction. Thank you, Espen. I appreciate it.
It's my pleasure. My pleasure. And it is important because I think a lot of people these days, and you know, correct me if I'm wrong, and I might paraphrase, but I think a lot of people are searching for, or could at least need, more meditation, mindfulness, and so on in their lives. So I want to start by asking, what made you interested in the intersection between psychology, neuroscience, and meditation, or the mindfulness side of things?
Yeah, I think what you said right there is right. Many people today feel like they're standing on shaky ground. And when you stand on shaky ground, you want to find ways to find your footing, to stabilize, to deepen your resilience, to be able to see clearly and figure out what to do. Meditation and other inner skills is the royal road to that, because while it's also important to improve things outside us in the world, and certainly to deal with our physical bodies, intervening inside your own being, your mind, your heart, I kind of use those terms interchangeably, intervening inside your own being is a special place because you have the most power there and you take the benefits with you wherever you go. So I think of what might seem like airy-fairy, woo-woo, new agey, soft, yoga camp once a year kind of hooey is actually incredibly hard-headed, based on recognizing that the world is challenging and is getting more turbulent. More than ever, we need to, and also the world's not helping us. The cavalry's not coming, generally speaking. It's on us. So based on the sense of what can you do yourself, that's kind of hard-headed and at the core of self-reliance, developing these inner qualities, these inner traits of mindfulness, self-compassion, self-worth, resilience, and happiness altogether, are really hard-headed and pragmatic things to do.
I love that. I couldn't agree more. Can you go a little bit deeper into the self-reliance part of things? You mentioned something very profound then. You are wherever you are going to go. And if you feel like you're standing on shaky ground, or your life is not as whatever that you'd like, how does self-reliance play a part of that, knowing that we are the only people that can change that for ourselves?
Yeah, it's the paradox of self-reliance and developing it is to start by recognizing the things that are out of your control and recognizing the ways that you're suffering, you've been hammered by life, you're stressed, you're pressed, you're pushed on. We have to start there. So this is not about positive thinking or some kind of so-called spiritual bypass. This is about starting with, wow, what's real? What's real? Okay. I have a lot of background in rock climbing, some mountain climbing too. And you have to find your footing. You know, a storm's coming in, it's late in the day, you're hungry, your feet hurt. You got to get off the rock or it's going to be bad. What are you going to do? You know, you have to face your situation. So that's part one, certainly. Part two, you got to get on your own side. Half the people who have walked into my office over the years as a therapist who has seen many, many, many people were not already on their own side. They were on the side of others. They were for others. They were an ally to others, but they were not a good friend to themselves. That's like the pilot light. If you don't have the pilot light ignited in your furnace, you can give it all the gas in the world and it won't matter, right? So getting on your own side, feeling that you have the right to get on your own side, having a kind of tender, kind attitude toward yourself, even if you're a rough and tough guy, and also a certain muscularity to it. Like, I'm going to be on my own side. I'm going to stand up for myself. I'm going to do the best I can. And then, to me, last is to really focus on what can you learn today? How can you grow a little today? What's in your power today to become a little stronger, a little wiser, a little kinder to yourself, a little more skillful? Because that's what's under your control. You can't change the past or even the present as it appears, but you can change who you are becoming. So that focus, that people call it growth mindset, a la Carol Dweck, but it's a fundamental orientation toward having a learning curve that isn't dead flat. It's actually reaching up. And then in the process of that, the underlying psychological forces of self-reliance hardwired into your nervous system will gradually develop. But you have to start by recognizing, you know, what sucks in your life. What are you dealing with? And then you've got to get on your own side, and then you need to have a learning orientation.
I love that. When you say getting on your own side, I'm getting the self-reliance and self-compassion piece. What do you find, you know, in your experience with patients and lecturing around the world and the amazing work that you're doing with the Compassion Coalition project, which we'll come back to in a moment. But what do you found to be some of the greatest obstacles or challenges in people's lives when it comes to being their own best friends or, you know, falling in love with how they show up in life or however we want to word it? What are some of the challenges that you've witnessed?
Internalized criticism from others, especially while growing up, big. Second, living in a culture or being a person who is systematically told that you do not matter as much as others, or that your job is to take care of them rather than taking care of yourself. And some of those messages are gendered. You can recognize the female version of that and the male version of that, and you know, beyond. Third, I think at a certain level, sometimes people feel that it's selfish or vain or somehow sinful or narcissistic to have the kind of kindness toward themselves that I'm talking about. While actually, if people develop compassion for themselves and a kindness for themselves, they get less selfish. They become less of a jerk toward other people. They actually, because they're building up this unshakable core inside of resilient well-being, so that when the waves of life come, this is the essence of resilience. It's a stable core of coping and well-being, right? If you're coping while being endlessly miserable and depressed and suicidal, that's not resilience. You know? Resilience, it's like surfing. You know, I've never physically surfed, but I've been in the ocean a lot. And I don't know, you're smiling. Maybe you've actually surfed yourself. You're riding the waves. And yeah, it's tense, you're alert, but it's still pretty great. That's resilience. That's really resilient. So to me, those are some of the key forces here. And to overcome them, first you have to realize that it's fair for you to be on your own side, to stand up for yourself. Second, to have a quality of heart for yourself. And then third, being muscular about it, being determined about it. And then you bring it out into the world, right? Just that alone makes you more resilient. The things I said, seeing your challenges clearly, getting on your own side and having a learning orientation makes you more resilient. And in addition, there are a couple that I find really super cool. One I'll just name is happiness. Happiness, genuine happiness, genuine, looking for things that you enjoy, feeling a sense of accomplishment and satisfaction in your life, gratitude, positive emotion, as Barbara Fredrickson and other academics have shown, is a major factor of resilience and long-term health. Second, heartfelt connections with others. Kind of on a range from, sorrowful compassion for what people are suffering, all the way to exuberant joy in doing something together, like celebrating with your mates because your team won, in some way. Everything in between, that kind of social range, major factors of resilience. And then I think last, I'll just name, because you're a spiritual person, a sense of larger perspective. There's actually good brain science stuff about the value of taking a wider view, seeing the whole, even lifting your gaze to the horizon line, does good things neurologically to reduce activation in the default mode network. I think of that as the ruminator, where we go, when we're ruminating and worrying and resenting and self-criticizing, right? A bigger picture, a wider whole, seeing things over the sense of time, recognizing that all phenomena occur interdependently. Everything exists relationally in a larger field, and everything that does exist is empty of absolute essence. So it occurs relationally. And just that perspective, that wider view, is calming and brings in new information and helps you be more resilient.
Perfect. I love this. Where does meditation fit in? We look at the world, we see it's busy in many ways, many places. And of course, the world that's most relevant in this instance, I believe, is the world in between your two ears, our two ears, and the people experiencing life.
Yeah.
I mean, we could talk about meditation as we know it all, but honestly, what have you found? And for those out there listening, watching, who may not be meditating, they may be meditating, want to take it to the next level, can you tell us a little bit about the research and the importance of meditation and anything else you feel is relevant in that regard?
Yeah. So there's meditation, and then there's the general factor of mindfulness. And being a mindful person, building up the trait of real-time mindfulness, so that even when challenges come, you still can sustain that quality of presence of mind. There's a stability in you that's a great resource when what's outside you is really unstable and shaky. Right? So meditation is to the mind, and eventually to the body, what aerobic exercise or just general activity is to the body. Like I look at you, I go, oh, that dude is pretty fit. If we wanted to prescribe, things that would have healthy benefit for the mind, meditation would be very, very much at the top. And it's important to appreciate that there are different kinds of meditation. There are secular meditations, like just following your breath or finding stable mindfulness. A lot of people meditate in a religious frame. For them, contemplative practice has a prayerful dimension to it. So to me, it's important to include all of that, including certainly the practices of the indigenous people, the First Nations people of the world, including in your own home country, in Australia, certainly mine in North America. These are very, important practices to appreciate. So tons of research on the health benefits of mindfulness of many, many kinds. What I find, because you're obviously a geek for this kind of thing. That's a compliment. Yeah. Okay. 4 ways regular meditation makes your brain better. You ready?
Okay.
All right. Makes your brain better based on structural changes in your brain, changes of structure and function that are visible in hardcore MRI studies, EEG studies, really hardcore stuff. Okay. 4 ways it makes your brain better. 1, it builds up the circuits of attentional regulation. That's a fancy phrase for being able to pay attention to what you want to pay attention to and keep it there, and without being distracted all the time. And also pull your attention away from stuff that's just not good for you to keep thinking about again and again and again, right? So regulating your attention, incredibly helpful. The busier, the noisier, the louder the world gets, the more shiny objects that are trying to grab our attention, that with a lot of profit motives behind them, the more important it is to get control of your attention. Also, technically, attention is like a spotlight and vacuum cleaner. It illuminates what it rests upon, and then it sucks it into your brain, because neuroplastic change in your nervous system, right, is really heightened for what we sustain attention to. There's a traditional saying, your mind takes its shape from what it rests upon. Well, your brain takes its shape, literally, from what your mind rests upon. Where's your mind resting? For most people, it's resting on their resentments, their worries, their feeling of inadequacy, intense pressure, their irritations. Well, gradually they become a more anxious, irritable, and unhappy person. All right. So where do you rest your attention? Okay. Second way is meditation makes your brain better, is that it improves emotion regulation. You become more able to kind of manage emotional reactions, which include both not letting yourself get hijacked by runaway anger or anxiety or feelings of inadequacy, while on the other hand, becoming more able to tolerate and be open to flows of emotion, rather than pushing them down or pushing them away, like, many people do, particularly men. So emotion regulation, really useful. It's also useful because there's studies that show if you use powerful magnets to knock out the emotion centers of the brain, and then you give people tests of decision making, including in complex situations involving other people, their performance will just plummet if you knock out their emotion centers. We need those emotion centers to function in business and in real life. Okay. Third way it makes your brain better is that it deepens the sense of body awareness, so that you get more in touch with yourself. And when you're more in touch with yourself, you feel more whole as a person. You're also more open to useful information from your body. And as you deepen in body awareness, it brings you into the present. And you also have a more holistic sense of yourself. And the self-referential muttering in your brain that takes everything so personally, it gets gradually quieter as people become more rested in embodiment. And then fourth way it makes your brain better is that it creates it kind of shifts the sense of self to become broader, more flexible, more open, less rigid, less possessive, less territorial, less identified with this or that. Shifts the sense of self. So it also increases the sense of connectedness with everything. So the self-world boundaries start to become less rigid, and people become more open to feeling lived and buoyed by life rather than separated and beset by life. 4 ways that meditation makes your brain better.
Phenomenal. Go back and listen to that again, everybody. I just want to read a couple of things out. I've been researching your work, and there are 4 words by Thich Nhat Hanh talking about Rick's work. It offers simple, accessible, practical steps to touching the peace and joy that's within every person's birthright. Rick Hanson, brilliant in the capacity to offer practical, powerful, and scientifically grounded practices, says Tara Brach, PhD, Mark Hyman, MD.
I'm going to start blushing. Wait.
Well, I'm just speaking this out because, one, to be able to have the neuroscience behind it, I think is very useful, but to have people that are, as far as I'm concerned, can see the late great Thich Nhat Hanh, etc., to have 4 words and speak of this work, I think it's really important to not just to, inflate your ego and give you the appropriate compliments, but for everyone listening to really get the grasp of what we're talking about here and the fundamental necessity for this in our lives. So I just want to say thank you again for taking the time. As we talk about meditation and neuroscience and obviously neuroplasticity, which you've spent so many years learning, What do you feel is the connection to us as beings and the quantum field, source consciousness, whichever way you want to talk about it? What role does that play in a person living a magnificent and healthy life?
Wow.
Big question, right?
I mean, well, far out, Espen. I mean, you didn't swerve away from that question. Far out. Because I think a lot of people chicken out and they don't want to face that question. Now, maybe an answer to that question is not at all. Okay. I disagree with that answer. But at least a person can actually face that question and not swerve from it. Like, good on you. So yeah. Wow. To be real, for many, many people, they are engaging meditative practices of some kind. For purely psychological, secular purposes, inside the so-called natural frame of the Big Bang universe. Mm-hmm. There's no reference to what they're doing to quantum field, source consciousness, non-dual knowing, the absolute, the divine, God, and so forth. Okay. And I think, fantastic. Whatever's helpful for you. If a person like you, clearly, and I, wants to help relieve suffering, we meet people where they are. Pure and simple. Okay. That said, I think for many people, to use a metaphor, if each of us is like a wave in the ocean, if the wave that has our name tag, the Espen wave, the Rick wave, okay, if that wave is really agitated and just kind of in shock, I don't know if you're going to show the video of this, but I'm waving my hand, like, it's really hard for the wave to recognize that it's part of an ocean whose nature is water. On the other hand, if a person takes a few breaths, and I'll actually name a little practice here, if you'll let me, involving three breaths that have neurological effect. You can spend more than 3 breaths worth of time with the 3 breaths, but if they just take a few breaths, suddenly that wave gets less agitated. It's less agitated. Okay. It's less in shock or pain. It's less overwhelmed. It's less frozen in trauma. It's more stabilized. And then as it gets quieter and quieter, after a few more breaths, maybe a minute has gone by, there's a natural widening of awareness with a growing recognition. Oh, all these other waves next to me, they have their own being too. Wow, I need to take them into account. Even more broadly, as we really start getting quieter, and more stable and simply more present, maybe the heart is starting to open, there can become a growing awareness of the whole sea, the whole ocean. And then, maybe at certain moments or flashes of this, there's a Tibetan saying, moments of awakening many times a day, right? Maybe there's just flashes of this, or maybe there's a growing stability of the sense of it, of, oh, wow, this wave that I am is a local expression of the whole ocean and is emerging even from a mysterious ground that is universal, that full of possibility, as it emerges into actuality. And maybe some people experience, sounds like you do, that the ground of all is in mysterious ways conscious in some way, even benevolent. That might be a way that meditation, can help us experience the big picture.
Yeah, thank you for speaking to that. And I think, coming from your clinical background, to be able to be scientifically backed, same as what I'm, delivering to my students, but to really have that essence of, call it spirituality, mindfulness, some people call it religion, whatever it might be, but to be able to recognize that we are a unique expression of the whole, And if we can expand our awareness at that level, I think everything will begin to change. And obviously this is the number one law of the 12 universal laws, the law of divine oneness, how we're unique expressions of something. The wave is the wave, yes, but are you not part of the ocean? And I think this is a great analogy. And I know in perhaps in this regard or in other regards, you're working and you're the founder of the Global Compassion Coalition Project. Can you please tell us about Global Compassion Coalition? What is it? Why are you doing it?
So people can go to the website, globalcompassioncoalition.org. We've launched about 6 months ago. Over 100,000 people and organizations, including many leading people around the world and leading organizations around the world, have joined, basically recognizing that something has gone really wrong in how the world is run. There are some bright pockets. I'm all for civil society, like Australia. I'd rather live in South Korea than North Korea, right? Still, it's really clear that the world is run for the few at the cost of the many, generally speaking. So what can we do about that? That's moved by compassion. How can we come together at a scale that's big enough to be strong enough to ultimately change systemic sources of suffering? And I think for some people, they look at the state of the world and they shrug and they say, wow, I'm going to take care of my own people, or even I'm going to focus on the individual level of improvement, which has been my career. And it's what you do too, Espen, and it's honorable. It's wonderful. But meanwhile, there's a way in which that's like teaching emotional intelligence skills on the deck of the Titanic as it races toward the clearly visible iceberg in broad daylight. That's the state of the world today. We are racing toward catastrophe with global warming, rising militarization, rising authoritarianism, to name three obvious and frankly intertwining forces in the world. And the people in the bridge, running the ship, are making as much money as they can, as fast as they can, while the Titanic races toward the iceberg. And so for me, what's important is both and. Teach mindfulness on the deck. Teach emotional intelligence skills to children in schools on the deck of the Titanic, while meanwhile banding together as passengers and crew at a scale that can force the ship to change its course before complete catastrophe. That's the vision of the Global Compassion Coalition.
Beautiful. Would you say that this is in alignment with or related to something like the Maharishi effect, when we see, 7,000 meditators coming together, breathing, meditating on peace, love, and then emanating that out to the world, reducing global crime rate by up to 16%, and many other amazing metrics that come out of that study? Is it a similar type approach, and what are your thoughts on that?
Oh, that's very interesting. I am fine with interventions of that sort, and I believe in them. And I think you may have heard this saying: the absence of evidence is not evidence of absence.
Lovely. Yes.
Yeah. A lot of dogmatic so-called scientists have a profoundly unscientific attitude that just rejects anything as being possible, that somehow doesn't have 50 double-blind studies in a meta-analysis.
What happened to hypothesis? And
what happened to open-minded beginner's mind? Yeah.
Crazy.
The line, right? In a beginner's mind are many possibilities, in an expert's mind are few. And I love science. I weekly get Science Magazine, right? It and Nature are the two leading publications in English. I love it because it's real news. It's not fake news. It's not disinformation. It's real factual stuff. I love that stuff. That said, I think there clearly are forces and energies and mysteries that scientific inquiry is in its infancy with regard to them. Okay. In addition to those kinds of effects, that you might get with, 1 billion people around the world. Think at scale. There are 8 billion people in the one human tribe, the one human band now, at scale. 8 billion of us. You can just imagine what might happen. Okay, that's great. I'm also interested in other pathways. I'm interested in pathways that lead to changing systemic factors of suffering that involve things like civic engagement, or that involve individuals taking political action to force corporations to change various policies, to joining together in ways that can do that. So I'm interested in both. I'm all for these more, consciousness-oriented, energy-oriented, quantum-level-oriented interventions. Great. And also, what can we do to, get to force corporations to simply declare their carbon footprint every year, which they resist doing because they are dumping their shit into the sky for the rest of us to deal with for 1,000 years to come. They don't want to admit it. That's called externalizing costs economically. They're not paying their way, So that's an example. There are many others.
I think that's a really important example as well. Many say, and research also, that we've gone extinct, say, 5 times. We're deep into the 6th mass extinction. If we continue on the same trajectory, we're certainly going to go extinct. So what do you see? Humanity's evolution, future. And I know, just my 2 cents worth, a mentor of mine once said, if you ask the question, where's the world going, then you're not a leader making a change. So I'm out there making a change. You are making a change. Many listeners and viewers are making a change. And on top of that awareness that we are making a difference, that we're heart-centered beings doing that for ourselves and obviously for others as well, where do you see the world going? And what are the shifts in consciousness and or whatever you wish to speak to that is necessary to be able to come out on top and, as you said, not take the power away, but to equilibrate what's going on with the power of the few, having all the money and all the power, heading towards that, that iceberg, and actually pivoting as a humanity. What can we do on an individual level? And what are your thoughts on this? Is a big topic. I mean, if we do continue, we're heading for the iceberg. What do we do here?
Beautiful question. It would be so easy to, imagine. So here you are, you and I are at the bar, right? We're both having a beer. We could just rattle on for a couple hours, but I'm going to try to be a lot more succinct than that, right? Let's see here. My opinion, right? Number one, promote civil society. Because in civil society, think about the last 10,000 years. It's been Game of Thrones. For most people, in most places, for most years, in the last 10,000 years. Only in the last couple hundred years, starting with America, a few other countries, maybe Switzerland, kinda, and then increasingly Australia, Finland, so forth, do you actually have civil society with real functioning democracies, pluralistic institutions, and pluralistic power centers. Because if you don't have pluralistic power centers, suddenly it's kings, queens, thugs, warlords, dictators, whatever they're called. So you building the fabric of civil society. And as right now we're pressure testing humanity. We're pressure testing the planet. We're moving to its carrying capacity for our species. We're running out of resources. In those kind of conditions, tyranny and authoritarianism, often grounded on, developing grievances, and people being aggrieved and vengeful, now backing an authoritarian, a strong man on a horse, it's said. We're under those kind of pressures, and the main bulwark against tyranny is civil society. So local organizations, football clubs, parent-teacher associations, city councils, centers of power in societies that can stand up against would-be dictators. So that's really important. And that includes civic engagement, particularly with young people who tend to check out. They feel helpless. They don't have a sense of connection to the whole. So connecting the personal to the political so that we all have a stake in the future. Even if we're not directly affected, even if our vote is just one of millions, we are participating in the greater good. And I think it's kind of moral I mean, to me, that muscular aspect of self-reliance involves a work ethic. You know what it's like? You're in a team, you're in a company, you have a sports club, whatever, and there's someone who's just kind of a slacker. They're sort of a freeloader. They're just riding. That's not good. None of us can afford to be a freeloader in the effort it takes to make to protect and build and extend civil society, including into tipping point countries like India, or countries, Brazil, Nigeria, around the world, let alone eventually, hopefully, China, although I think that's going to be a stretch. So protect civil society. I think that's really important. Another one, just to say it, is that obviously we need to build up our resilience in the face of the challenges that are going to come. Even in the best estimates, you're probably pretty aware of them, the planet's going to heat up by at least 5 degrees Fahrenheit by the end of the century. That's really going to pressure test us. There are going to be more storms, there are going to be crop failures, there are going to be famines, resource shortages. How can we develop resilience? Resilience does not undermine reducing emissions. It just faces reality that even if we reduce emissions tomorrow, all the greenhouse gases in the sky are going to keep heating the planet for a while. So focusing on resilience. I don't think the human species is going to go extinct. I think in the extreme, and I want to be really clear how horrific this is, what I'm about to say, in the extreme, 1-2 billion people may die. Horrific. Well, the human species will continue. It will continue. So I think that's true. Long term, I'm very hopeful. Short term, I think we're going to have a rocky century.
I agree. And many people look at this as in what's been happening in the world, and also some in religious or spiritual concepts of the Great Awakening or whatever you might call it. Do you think this is a relevant thing going on now? Is this something happening on a spiritual level? Is that part of your hypothesis, or is it clearly cognitive and something else? What are your thoughts?
I'm a Buddhist who believes in God, as I use that word. That's a quick thumbnail summary. But my notion of the ground is that it's the ground of the whole universe. And it ultimately could be the ground of many universes. And I don't think Earth is special. I think it's special in some sense, but I don't think any part of the universe is special to the ground, beyond the sense that every part is special. So I think it's kind of, egocentric and self-centered. It was a really hard push for, Western civilization to recognize that Copernicus was right, that the Earth is not the center of the universe, and the human species is not the centerpiece of God's plan. I just think that's grandiose and delusional. My notion of the divine is that it's the ground of all. It's a generative, unconditioned, timeless, eternal, probably conscious and benevolent in the sense of the givingness of the arising of every moment, kind of ground that's really important to tap into. I don't myself think it's true, although I could be wrong, that there's some kind of cosmic plan that the human species has to go through this crisis to fully awaken. Now, going through this crisis, I think on the other side of it, including related to the growing power of women, long overdue.
Yes.
Rooted in, the long overdue education of girls. I am hopeful that our species will grow up, because we're going to have to.
Yeah.
In the American Revolution, apparently, as our founding fathers, they were all men, signed the Declaration of Independence, one of them said to the others, "Gentlemen, now we must all hang together, because if we don't, we shall all hang separately."
Oh. Proof bump moment.
That's our moment as a species.
Yes, that is exactly where we're at. And I feel that. I feel like it with every part of me,
Yeah.
coming together and creating the change that we want to see together.
Yeah.
Very
Yeah.
special. Again, I thank you for your time. I want to just make sure that people know where to go, because this is very useful, very conscious, very necessary information. rickhanson.net is the website. The book, we talked about a couple, but one I'd really like you guys to go and check out is Making Great Relationships. We've got Neurodharma that we talked about before with the foreword from Thich Nhat Hanh and many others. Where else, Rick, do people go to learn more about your work?
Oh, thank you. So it's Rick Hanson, son.net, rickhanson.net. And in addition to my website, which is just chock full of great resources, the Being Well podcast is not competitive with yours. It's another good presentation regularly I'd recommend. And then in the little time that we have, I just want to add one third point to what you said. You asked me, so what do I think? I said, well, I think it's important to build up civil society. And I think that it's important to take the long view. In addition to that, it's important to come together with others. Because classically, the alphas divide the betas. That's how Game of Thrones operated, right? And so what we need to do is we need to look for ways to join with others at a scale that's big. So neighborhood associations, professional groups, small communities. The Charter for Compassion has done a fantastic job. Lynn Reeder, one of the key people there in Australia, Compassion Australia, is really good, building up ways that more and more people can connect with each other to stand together for the greater good. And one of the things I'll finish on it's near and dear to me because I love wilderness. I love being outdoors, and I love nature, and I feel sorrowful about what global warming is doing to species, that will be forever gone once they go extinct. It's real. Every individual, certainly in the developed countries of the world, like you and me, can mitigate the harms they do through their own carbon footprint. No matter how green they are or how much they're conserving, there's an irreducible carbon footprint. In America, the average carbon footprint is 10 metric tons a year, tons of CO2. 16 metric tons a year. In Australia, you're better than we are. It's probably closer to 8, it's still real. The cost of each metric ton that inexorably we are involved in generating through our activities is estimated at about $250 per ton. The cost of mitigating that impact is less than $20 a ton. For less than 50 Australian cents a day, do you have cents? You have half a dollar,
yes.
Right? Yeah, that's it. Each of us can literally zero out the impact of the logs we're throwing on the giant bonfire that's producing the greenhouse gases from humanity every year. And imagine a mass movement of 100 million, or even 500 million people worldwide making a moral commitment to being personally net zero themselves. That would reduce 5 to 10% per year of the carbon emissions going up in the sky. That would have the largest single impact of any intervention, and no one can stop us. 50 cents a day, net zero, neutralizing the harms you're doing. First of all, do less harm. Basic moral principle. So that would be another thing that people could join together in doing. That's within reach for each of us.
Beautiful. Thank you so much for your wisdom, for your time, for your heart.
Thank you.
Messages. Yeah, really, really special. I've got a last question for you, and you think you may have answered it, but I'll ask it just in case. And it goes like this, straight off the cuff. I want you to imagine now that every person on the planet has gathered to hear the message from Rick Hanson. Take a breath whenever you're ready. What is your message to the world right now?
It's a great question to take it for real. The first intuitive, heartfelt response was listen. Not listen to me, but really listen. Listen to each other. Listen to the suffering in others. Listen to the call of your own heart. Listen. Listen to the trees, to the land, to the seas, to the ancestors. Listen.
Answered
Thanks,
like a
Espen.
Buddhist.
Thanks, Espen. Honestly, that was great. That knocked me into a great place. I appreciate it. I want to try to listen more myself.
Oh, I think there's no better way to end this conversation than exactly that. And, my practice with Buddhist meditation, Vipassanas over the years, has been one of the greatest gifts that I've ever given to myself. So let us take this message away. Let us really tune in. Let us really become present, and let us really take the time to listen. Thank you so much for listening to us having this conversation. And again, thank you so much, Rick, for taking the time to be with us here today.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.